Hello, my name is Ana Laura Funes. I am Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Eastern Connecticut State University, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this symposium, Breath, Inspire, Expire, and to share with you a reflection on breathing that emerges out of my research on the notion of prāṇa in the Sanskrit sources of Vedanta and Sāṅkhya philosophical traditions. I read these sources together with the work of French philosopher Luce Irigaray in an attempt to construct an intercultural ethics of difference. Irigaray calls for the need to cultivate a breath that is capable of creating community through the affective recognition of the other. And in the Sāṅkhya text called the Yuktidīpikā, we find an understanding of prāṇa, or the vital breath, in relation to the act of sharing. So I would like to share with you this exploration into a philosophy of breathing that can emerge inspired by the work of Luce Irigaray and by a close reading of some Indian philosophical sources. Breathing is usually thought of as a function performed individually for the maintenance of one's own subsistence. It is one's own breathing that keeps us alive, and it is one's own breathing that stops at the moment of death. Throughout one's life, the way we use our own breath is up to each of us. In this sense, breathing could be considered a solitary act. However, not until recently, we have started to think about breathing as a shared act, as a relational moment that happens with someone else and that affects others. In The Way of Breath, Luce Irigaray reminds us of the sharing of breath that happens at the beginning of all human life in the womb. The womb is that first receptacle where we breathe through the fluid matter carried by our mother's blood. Luce Irigaray calls this first co-breathing, that is provided by the maternal feminine element, a gift of air, because it is marked by an experience that is free from discourse, free from the conditionings of language. To reflect on the shared breath experienced in the womb is to remember a tangible yet invisible relation that connects the subject of breathing to otherness without necessarily appealing to a subject-object division. Breathing in general, but specifically in the womb, blurs the boundaries between the self and other, fetus and mother, internal and external. In this sense, breathing could be considered as the basis for a mode of thinking that does not appropriate its object by reducing it to its own categories. Instead, the recognition of an original co-breathing at the beginning of our existence could be the basis for the construction of what Luce Irigaray calls a culture of two subjects. The recognition of this original co-breathing has been expressed before in an ancient poem from the Rig Veda, the Hymn of Creation or the Nasadiya Sukta, which evokes precisely that initial moment of pre-linguistic thought with the image of the one who breathes windlessly. In the beginning, says the seer poet, when there was no death nor immortality, no sign of day or night, that one breathed without air by its own power. There existed nothing else beyond that. Darkness existed hidden by darkness in the beginning. Indistinguishable, all this was water. This Vedic hymn of creation acknowledges an implicit cosmic difference between the one and the darkness that surrounds it. I read this Vedic darkness within darkness as a non-discursive relation established between the embryonic one and the oceanic possibilities that surround it like a womb. Recognizing this relation, according to Luce Irigaray, would allow us to find our breathing in relation with one another. And this would be a breathing that is at once dual and one. A breathing that could serve as source for an authentic subjectivity of the we, as the ground of differentiation between an I and a you. the realization that breathing is originally a co-breathing has the possibility of engendering an understanding of the self that breathes, that thinks with the surrounding world rather than against it or separate from it. By becoming aware of one's own breathing, we can undergo a spiritual, ethical transformation that allows us to rethink the way we breathe with others, the way we can share this breath in the very encounter with difference. In the Upanishads and the non-dual Vedanta philosophical tradition, the sharing of breath appears in the discussion of prāṇa, the vital breath. Knowledge of this vital breath was thought to be very beneficial to a human being. One could only obtain that knowledge from a qualified teacher, from someone who has mastered their own breath. Mastering one's own breath consisted in becoming aware of one's own vital breath, the prāṇa, as being one with the cosmic breath, or Brahman. According to the Upanishads, prāṇa, the vital breath, is that which is shared by all, men and women, beyond differences of age, culture, gender, class, race, etc. However, one must always have in mind, says Luce Irigaray, that authentic sharing demands one thing: the respect of the natural and spiritual life of the self and the other. Her idea of sharing breath requires an articulation of singularity and community that emerges from a place of a non-narcissistic self, but still acknowledges the singularity of the difference, particularly of sexuate difference, that recognizes the feminine. Her notion of sharing breath differs from certain non-dualistic teachings transmitted in the Upanishads, in that hers is a breath that seeks to build bonds between different subjects, while the one found in many Upanishads is meant to dissolve all subjects into the one cosmic breath. However, sharing breath with others requires learning how to breathe with the difference. Individuals breathe with different rhythms. Some breaths are longer than others, some are fast, others are slow. Some people breathe poorly, some others breathe loudly. Some forget to breathe, while others are never really allowed to breathe enough. So the question is how to harmonize between these two poles of breathing experiences: our original co-breathing and the attainment of an autonomous breath. How can there be a recognition of the equal importance of the multiplicity of breaths without vanishing them into the one cosmic breathing self? In an Upanishadic story of creation that talks about Prajapati, the creator, standing alone, feeling no happiness. The Upanishad narrates that Prajapati, meditating on himself, created numerous offspring, but they were like a stone, lifeless. And then he thought, let me enter within in order to awaken them. He made himself like wind and tried entering into its offspring, but being one, he couldn't. He then divided himself into 5 winds: prāṇa, apana, samana, udana, and dhyana. The model of the 5 winds is a phenomenological map that traces the sensations of vital functions in the body under 5 modalities. Apana refers to the sensations that go from the nose down to the navel and from the navel down to the feet, and it is related to the function of inhaling and also with the functions of expelling urine, feces, and other secretions of the body. Prāṇa is associated with the breathing felt in the chest and thoracic area. It includes the sensations that go from the navel to the mouth, to the function of exhaling, and with the lungs and heart. Prāṇa is also related to the parts and functions of the body that connect us with things we receive from the outside, such as the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Samana is conceived as containing the sensations felt in the middle, around the navel or between the navel and the heart, and it is related with the functions of digesting and distributing food and water around the body. Vyana is the overall feeling of well-being in the body and has as its vital function regulating the vital operations of the body as a whole. It is mainly associated with the circulatory system. Udana is referred as the ascending wind and has been associated in the yogic texts with the higher cognitive functions associated with the head, such as perception, consciousness, reasoning. It is also related with maintaining the body erect and with the release of the bodily air from the top of the head at the moment of death, according to the yogic tradition. According to the 8th century non-dualist Vedanta philosopher Sāṅkhya, these individual winds interact with the cosmic winds through our inhalations and exhalations and find their correlates in the environmental functions of these winds. Apana, for example, is the pulling down force of the earth that manifests in the gravity and weight that keeps our body grounded. Or Vyana corresponds with the circulation of currents around the globe that manifests in our veins. Udana would correspond with the upward movement manifested in the fire flames. And Samana in the space that links the earth and the sun, just as the middle part of our bodies joins the lower and upper parts. The relation between our individual breath and the cosmic breath is isomorphic. According to the Chandogya Upanishad, this breath in here and that sun up there are exactly the same. This is warm and so is that. Vedanta emphasizes the experience of oneness and the harmonious correspondences between the external environment and the functions of one's own body. It emphasizes the relation between the individual breath and the cosmos, but it does not tell us much about the relation between two different individual breaths. Most modern interpretations of the Indian theory of bodily winds focus on its development in the yoga tradition, which teaches the harnessing of the breath as it flows within the yogi's body in ways that can create health and longevity. Various scholars take the pranic theory of the bodily winds to be an early description of human physiology. The theory of prāṇa has usually been related to early models of respiration, circulation, and nervous system. However, reading the function of the prāṇas only as proto-physiology tends to ignore the dual aspect of breath. On the one hand, our individual physical and physiological breath is interconnected with the external air, the atmosphere, and the environment. This is an autonomous, dynamic movement that happens whether we are conscious of it or not. On the other hand, our breath is connected with other individual breaths in the constant act of creating meaning. This breath, if left unconscious, runs the risk of merging itself into a logic of oneness that doesn't recognize difference, neither the sexuate origin of our initial co-breathing with the feminine. It is the cultivation of this relational breath that can develop an autonomous breathing, conscious of the affective, social, and interpersonal aspects involved in our moral interaction with others. This relational and moral aspect of prāṇa is clearly considered in the Yuktidīpikā, which is an 8th century commentary on the Sāṅkhya Karika of Ishvara Krishna, a classical text from the Sāṅkhya tradition. In this text, prāṇa is characterized as an inclination, a movement that advances forward. The examples offered to illustrate this movement make it clear that it refers both to a natural physical position, such as that of an inclined tree, as well as to a certain drive to move forward, like the one observed in the army ready to win the battle, or in a person that desires wealth, or someone's disposition towards virtue, or pleasure, or learning, or their opposites. The vital wind of apana is associated with the attitude of departure or avoidance from virtue or from knowledge, Udana, the wind that moves upwards, is associated with feelings of superiority, status, self-judgment, or with the desire to excel or win. It is observed also in the one who has obtained knowledge and feels proud about it. Vyana is illustrated with the example of wifely devotion to convey the sense that is related with unconditionality. The description of the vital air of Samana is the most interesting of the 5 winds given in the Yuktidīpikā because its social function directly relates to the sharing of breath. It is the wind related to getting together with others. It's the breath that emerges from one's own heart, from one's feelings and affections that are active at times when one is eating or drinking together with others. It is the movement, physical, dispositional, internal, external, involved in sharing time and experiences of connection with one's partner, children, siblings, and friends. Not only is this vital air exemplified with human interrelations, but the text also gives examples of samana with and among non-human animals. Samana is the vital air perceived in the salivating dog that is about to be fed, or in the help provided by a bull carrying a load, or in mating animals. Perhaps samana is that breath that Luce Irigaray wants to see cultivated in our present culture. Because this is the breath of community, the breath of sexual difference, which gives the ability to be with one another with difference, with one's own breath. To summarize, in the Upanishads, we find the importance to merge the personal breath with the cosmic one, because that is thought to be liberating and brings mastery over the natural elements. In the yogic tradition, the cultivation of breathing techniques emphasize the physical and physiological aspects of the notion of prāṇa as a way to enhance one's own body for the experience of health and the divine. In the present, however, it is indispensable, as Luce Irigaray insists, to call for the cultivation of a self-affective breathing that can be shared in connection with others under the recognition of a multiplicity of breaths. Women, Black and indigenous communities, the breath of minorities, the breath of children, older people, people with different abilities, etc. The social functions uniquely associated with the vital winds in the Yuktidīpikā reflect the evolution of an ontology of the breath in the making. We have gone from an ontology of the oneness of breath in Vedanta philosophy to an ontology of the breath as trueness in the Sāṅkhya tradition. This is a breath that recognizes the one breath that comes to be two subjects that breathe together. For the intimate breath to become a shared prāṇa, we, ourselves, society, political systems, must recognize our breathing as an original and sexuated co-breathing. The notion of samana as shared breath has the power to open up the ethical reflection to the recognition of both the feminine and the masculine breathing subjectivities. It also makes possible the consideration of difference in the breath of non-human animals, in the breathing environment, and in any other previously unrecognized breathing form. The relational map of bodily winds found in the Yuktidīpikā, with the peculiar role given to samana, and the awareness of sexual difference drawn from Luce Irigaray's philosophical thought, might give us a hint to continue developing and deploying the notion of prāṇa within a contemporary and intercultural ethics of breathing.